Hello, computer animation. Today we're going to be looking at how to have a camera and an object follow a path that you have set. So let's take a look at how this works. So I'm just going to share my screen here for Blender so you can see that. So hopefully you can see my Blender screen well. So what we're going to want to do for this particular follow the path assignment, which is only worth 5 marks, is we're going to obviously in a new document here, firstly go into orthographic view. So we're going to want to click in here and change to ortho view. We're going to also probably go into top view. So we'll press 7 to go into top view. And I'm going to delete out my cube so that I've got sort of a blank screen here. Now, obviously, at this point, I would also save my file, but I think by this point, you probably know how to save your file. So what we want to do firstly is we want to, in object mode, we want to add a curve. So add curve, and then we're going to add a path. So add curve path. Now what we're going to do is we're going to try and make some sort of like shape. Like think about kind of like a roller coaster sort of like looping shape if you want to think about that. So once we've added the path in object mode, we're going to go into edit mode. And then I'm going to just take away this translate manipulator by clicking on this button here for a moment, and then right click on one of the endpoints here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to extrude, and I'm just going to kind of pull out. So I'm going to E to extrude, and then I'm going to just pull, and in a number of different points kind of make a little bit of a loop. And I mean, you can do whatever shape you want. I'm not going to make anything too complex here, but basically something like this. Now at the end point where I kind of come around and I'm wanting to connect this with my original point, what I want to do is while this point is still selected, I'm going to shift right click on the other point, and then I just simply press the letter F for fill to fill in, and we get one continuous loop or path that we have here. Now I'm going to go back into object mode once I have this, and I can see this, but what we do see is that we are perfectly flat still with this path. So I'm going to go back into edit mode here for a moment, and I'm going to go into front view now, and I'm going to just grab some of these points I have, and I'm just going to pull up a little bit. And what I'm doing here, if you can see, is I'm basically giving a little bit of rise to certain areas. Now, do we have to do this? Not particularly, but like if you were doing a roller coaster sort of idea here, then it would make sense to sort of have a little bit of raise and elevation. So now what we're seeing is something that looks like this, and from a top view like this, and more from an angled view kind of like this. So we're rolling around. Now I'm going to go back into object mode, and I'm going to go into top view. And what I would like to do now is I would like to, while my object is selected, I'm going to shift D to duplicate. And I'm just going to pull this off to the side a little bit. Okay, so what I've done right now, nothing crazy, is I've just simply made a path, and I have, like, you know, using the extrude button and then F to fill, have created a continuous loop. And now I've simply shift D to make a duplicate of this. And we'll see why I have a duplicate in a moment here. But for right now, what I'd like to do is I'm going to go into a separate layer. So I'm just going to move over to the layer to the right here. And I'm going to, in here, going to click on add curve circle. So I'm adding what's called a Bezier circle here. Now this Bezier circle looks reasonable in size for right now, but trust me, we're going to want to make it a little bit smaller. So I'm going to, while I'm in object mode, press S and go 0.3. So I'm going to make it about 1/3 of the size. I'm just going to zoom in a little bit so it's easier for me to see. But this is what I have. I have a Bezier circle now. Now in edit mode, and this is very important, I'm in edit mode right now, rather than in object mode, and now I'm going to duplicate this object. And the reason why I'm in edit mode rather than object mode to duplicate this is because I want, whenever we add an object or whenever we duplicate an object in edit mode, as you might have heard me say before, it links those objects together. And in fact, I actually want these objects to be linked right now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to shift D, and I'm going to duplicate this. Now, I'm going to, instead of shift D, I'm just going to escape out of that. I'm going to shift D, and I'm going to press the enter key immediately, and I'm going to use my translate manipulator. So while I have my translate manipulator on, I'm just going to drag this over a bit so that it's perfectly over to the left of my other Bezier circle. Now, once again, what I did there was I shift D in edit mode, then immediately press the enter key. And while my translate manipulator, that's this tool here, is on, I then just used my in this case, my x-axis arrow to drag over to the left. Okay, so what I have then, if I come back in object mode, is I have two Bezier circles, but they are linked. Now, you may say, well, why do we do that? Well, we'll see in a second here. So what I'm now going to do is I'm going to shift, I'm just going to click into my other layer, and I'm going to click onto my one path. So I'm just going to zoom out a little bit so I can see my path again. Now, what I want to do is over here, while my path is selected, if I go over to the object data, that's that tool to the left of the material tool, it should look a little bit like a curve, a path. And so if I click on this, I have options available to adjust the appearance or what my path does. And one of the options, if I go about halfway down, is an option to bevel. And so in here, I have a choice to bevel, and I have some bevel options, but right below there's also a bevel object. And what I can choose to use to bevel my object is my Bezier circle. So watch what happens when I click this button. Boom, I have those two circles I created is now the thickness. The bevel is another word for like creating depth or thickness to an object. I've now got that. And why I created two circles is because I then sort of have what looks like a track, like kind of like a roller coaster track sort of thing. And if I were to go back into my other layer here, and I were to click on these objects and go into edit mode, and I were to like decide I wanted to drag this a little closer, then notice that this object is going to be, when I come in here, is going to be a little bit closer now. This will be a little closer to it. So the distance that we have on our Bezier circle will control how wide this is here. Now, at this point here, I have the track, and what I would like to do now is I would like to kind of create a ball of some sort that I could have kind of roll around the track. So I'm just going to go in here and top view, and I'm just going to simply add in object mode a mesh UV sphere. So I'm going to make a UV sphere, and clearly it's a little bit too big. So I'm going to scale it to about maybe 0.4 of that size right now. So S.4. And then I'm going to add a material to this, a black material, just so it stands out from the gray that we currently have. So I'm just going to turn the grayscale right down so it's black. And then I'm going to try and position it somewhat so that it sits in the actual thing. So I'm just going to, using my translate manipulator and looking at it from this perspective, try and get it somewhat in the track. Now, at this point here, I'm just going to go into top view again so it's easier for us to see. And I'm going to bring this back a little bit so it's easier for you to sort of see the whole thing. What I need to do is I need to now link this object to my path. And so what I need to do is, once again, and this is an important step, I need to select my object, in this case my ball, then I need to shift click on my path, and then I need to control P. So if you recall, when we learned about armatures, we learned about control P to parent the armatures. When we're dealing with a path in this case, we're going to get different options come up, and one of these parent options is to follow path. So if I click on the follow the path now, what we will see is that the object is linked to this path that we have, and it's going to follow in conjunction with the path. Now, you'll also see, hopefully, if you can see in the screen, that there's a little dotted line here, and what this is indicating is that this is where the start point is of this path. And this makes sense because this is where the original point was that I sort of extruded out from. But I'm just going to play it from here, just so you can see that it's going to look like a mess right now. So I'm going to press play. And notice it looks really weird. It's not following at all, because once again, if I go and stop this and go to frame 1, what I want to do is I want to have my ball, my UV sphere, excuse me, starting over here where the dotted line is. So we shouldn't really see a dotted line because it should be nicely positioned where we want it. Now, if I were to run this at this point now that it's in the right spot, watch what happens. Now my ball is nicely following right around my path, exactly in line. Now, once again, notice that I stopped at 100. So the reason why it's stopping at 100 and then starting again at when it gets back to 1 is because, and I'll show you this, if I click on my path here and I go in object mode and go to the object data, so that's this little path icon here. Notice that there's another thing below the bevel that we set here. There is something called path animation. So when we did that control P and said follow the path, it's the same as clicking on this option here. And what we also have is we have how many frames this is going to run by. So right now we saw what 100 frames look like. If I went and changed this to, let's say, 100 and Well, let's change it to 200 just so we can see. So what this is going to do is this is going to make one loop of this path take 200 frames, or approximately about 8 seconds. So if I were to go back to frame 1 now and look at this, what you'll see is it does the same. It's going to follow the path just like it did before, but it's going to be slower because it's half the speed of what it was before. It's taking 8 seconds to go around this whole path as opposed to the 100 frames, or approximately 4 seconds. Now, once again, at the end of it all, we only have 200 frames. So I want to change this end to 200. So it's going to loop through each time, and it's just going to keep running and starting again each point. So hopefully that makes sense. Now, the other thing I wanted to look at quickly is this. We could have our camera set up so we could sort of see this. And if we were to play this, yes, we can see sort of, you know, we could set the camera up further back and we could be able to see a little bit of what's going on. But let's say we wanted the camera to actually follow precisely that ball as it moves through this little like course or roller coaster. So how do we do that? So let's take a look at that. So I'm going to go back into frame 1. I'm going to go back into top view here. And I'm just going to position my camera a little bit closer. And I might even actually just sort of position it in 3D view and then Control-Alt-0 to sort of get the camera set up there. Now, clearly the camera is too wide at this point for what I want, but at least I got a sort of a starting point. So now I can go back into, let's say, side view or front view. And I can look at my camera and I can maybe bring it down a little bit, pull it down a little bit, and then I can go into camera view and just G and pull over a little bit so that it's really lined up nicely, sort of centered on that ball. So, you know, you could go closer, you could go a little further back. It's kind of your choice, but at least you can see how I sort of centered it. I focused this on that particular ball at this point. Now, at this point, what I have, if I'm going to go back into sort of front view so I can see my camera. Now, what I have here is I have my camera, and what I would like to do is that I'd like to now have my camera follow the path as well. So while I'm doing this, just like we did before, we select the object in the case before it was the ball. Now it's the camera. I'm going to select the camera first. Then I'm going to shift click not on the path we have that's beveled, but the duplicate path that we have. So I'm going to shift click on that, and then I'm going to Control P and set follow the path. And once again, when I have this path selected, I'm going to make sure that my frames is 200 to match the 200 frames we have for the other one. Now, the last thing I really want to do here is I want to deselect my camera here, just select my path, and I want to make sure that my path, in fact, lines up nicely so it's like snug with the other path here. So it's going to, you know, look good. Now, let's now take a look at our camera. So I'm going to go into 0 to get into my camera view. Press 0 on the numpad, and then I'm going to play this and watch what happens now. My camera is going to follow along precisely with this path as well. So it now is following this perfectly along. And it says, in essence, this is a neat feature that enables us to really precisely you know, have a camera or even have an object follow a particular path that we set. Maybe we design a really complicated landscape and then we want or even a roadway, we want to have that object we designed to follow that perfectly. Well, we could set that path and just make sure the path is set along the roadway, and then we've got this all working really nicely. So this is not intended to be a very difficult assignment. It's only worth 5 marks. I would presume that you could do this in half a class, but hopefully that makes sense. Thanks for watching. If you have any questions, just please ask in class. Thank you. So I'm just stopped to share, and I will end the video now. Thanks for watching.